Did you think the roar of the Trans Am engine in Smokey and the Bandit was real? It was actually dubbed from an old sound effects archive, sliced and pieced together so meticulously that almost no one noticed. This multi-million-dollar movie script originally started on a scrap of scratch paper that the entirety of 1977 Hollywood deemed to have absolutely zero chance of success. And that was just the surface. The following 17 facts about Smokey and the Bandit 1977 will show you that behind a film seemingly chaotic and cheap lay stories that Hollywood has never made public. Number 1. From a banned case of beer to a $1 million idea. A free case of beer, it sounds like backstage trivia, but it became the catalyst for one of the most iconic action films of the 1970s. In 1976, on the set of the movie Gator, director Hal Needham received several cases of Coors beer from a driver traveling from California. At that time, Coors was not legally allowed to be distributed on the East Coast of the United States because it was unpasteurized and required continuous refrigeration throughout its entire transport. To most people, it was just beer, but to Needham, it was a story running on the highway. He didn't see a beverage, he saw a shipment perpetually pursued, a genuine risk, and a complete narrative structure existing in real life. The words left his mouth almost instantly: "Bootlegging Coors. This is a movie." Those around him laughed, thinking it was a mid-shoot joke. But Needham wasn't joking. In his mind, the image of a cross-country trucker, constantly outrunning the police, began to take sharp focus, not as a creative concept, but as a real bootlegging run taking place. And the craziest part, this entire $1 million project did not begin with imagination, but with a real case of beer being kept cold in the real world. Number 2. The beer treated like federal contraband. It might seem like a humorous detail about trucks and beer, but the real-world reality carried far more serious legal gravity. At the time, Coors had not undergone a full pasteurization process, meaning it had to be kept cold continuously from the brewery to the consumer. This turned shipping from the American West to the East Coast into a high-risk gamble, where even a slight temperature variance would spoil the entire cargo. Federal agencies monitored it strictly, viewing Coors transport trucks almost as a form of special transit that could be inspected at any moment on the interstate. Drivers didn't just face the risk of being pulled over, they faced the seizure of their entire cargo if they violated preservation standards. In other words, this wasn't an adventure, it was an act bordering the edge of the law. And this exact truth obsessed Hal Needham. He didn't need to invent a risk, it already existed, running on real roads every single day. When a cinematic concept requires no exaggeration to be gripping enough for a script, it becomes a dangerous weapon in the hands of Hollywood. What the studios failed to realize back then was that they weren't reading an entertainment pitch. They were looking at a cinematized version of an actual federal issue. Number 3. A script written on scratch paper and knocking on Hollywood's door. In Hollywood, everything usually begins with a system, boardrooms, assistants, treatments heavily revised across multiple rounds, and standardized pitch meetings. But Hal Needham broke the entire process. No talent agency, no studio standard script structure, not even a proper cinematic format. He wrote the entire concept on cheap legal pads, resembling notes more than a screenplay. Each page was a fragmented piece of action, but when pieced together, it mapped out a multi-state pursuit. Afterward, instead of routing it through the studio system, he did something no one in Hollywood does. He personally drove straight to Burt Reynolds' house. No agents, no official appointments, no preliminary negotiations. Just a stuntman turned lead director, standing at the doorstep of an A-list star with a stack of crumpled papers in his hands. And miraculously, it worked. Reynolds read it, was captivated, and nodded immediately. A multi-million-dollar project was finalized not in a glass office, but at the threshold of a private home. But the true twist lay ahead. The character of the Bandit that Reynolds was about to turn into an icon was never originally written for him. Number 4. A role snatched at the final minute. Originally, Smokey and the Bandit was envisioned as a low-budget project of about $1 million, enough to shoot quickly, cleanly, and without drawing attention. The role of the Bandit was designed for Jerry Reed, a country singer with a natural, rugged demeanor tailored for the film's spirit. But the moment Burt Reynolds stepped into the project, everything changed instantly. His magnetism pulled the entire gravitational force of Hollywood, transforming a B-movie into a project tracked by the entire industry. The budget immediately skyrocketed past $5 million. And this was exactly when the studio began to panic. Universal did not believe a film revolving around trucks, bootlegged beer, and police chases deserved that level of investment. With the shooting date looming, they abruptly slashed the budget by $1 million without negotiation. The crew was thrown into peril. The shooting schedule remained unchanged, but their resources had vanished. No one was certain how long the project would survive, but instead of collapsing, they accelerated. It was precisely the lack of money and the crushing pressure of time that inadvertently birthed the true energy of the film: chaotic, fast, and with no way out. Number 5. The man who stepped back to create a legend. In every success story, there is always someone who stands right next to the epicenter of light but does not step into it. For Jerry Reed, that spotlight was the Bandit. Initially, he was cast to become the driver of the Trans Am, the central figure of the entire narrative. But when Burt Reynolds appeared, that position was instantly replaced. Reed didn't react the way Hollywood usually expects: no disputes, no conflicts, no walking away from the project. He stepped back and took the role of Snowman the Trucker, backing up the Bandit from behind. A decision that seemed to sacrifice the spotlight, but one that created the perfect structure for the film. Snowman wasn't just a supporting role, he was the operational pulse. The man who ensured the pursuit never dropped its velocity. It was Reed's distinct southern drawl, his composure, and the way he turned a rearguard role into the second soul of the film that forged the legendary Bandit-Snowman duo. Without Snowman, the Bandit was merely a reckless driver. But thanks to Reed, the story became a two-man system, one driving, one keeping the rhythm, and together, they drove that run straight into history. Number 6. The sound of the car never belonged to the Trans Am. The engine's gam roar transformed the Trans Am in Smokey and the Bandit into a symbol of speed. But what few people know is that it completely bypassed the actual car. The entirety of the sound the audience hears in the film was actually borrowed from another source, the V8 roar of a 1955 Chevrolet Custom, an engine archetype that had previously appeared in legendary films like Two-Lane Blacktop and American Graffiti. When Hal Needham heard the original audio of the Pontiac on set, he rejected it instantly without a second thought. It was too clean, too tame, completely lacking the raw sensation of a machine tearing away under pursuit. He didn't need a technically correct engine sound. He needed something that sounded like raw metal ripping itself apart at high velocity, something coarse, aggressive, and bordering on out of control. And the solution implemented was incredibly simple, yet masterfully manipulative. Take the audio of a completely different car and graft it directly onto the Trans Am on screen. No permission sought, no explanation offered, just a sensory illusion potent enough to deceive the audience's perception. But ironically, while audio can be replaced in the editing room, the crew soon realized that, in real life, they couldn't simply graft on the most critical elements actual cars for the action sequences. Number 7. 4 cars for an entire action film. An entire racing film with exactly 4 cars to shoot production-wise. That was an almost absurd limitation. But with Smokey and the Bandit, that was the harsh reality from day one of rolling. Pontiac, possessing zero faith in Hal Needham's project, viewed it as a high-risk gamble rather than a promotional opportunity. They refused large-scale backing and dismissed the request to provide 6 new Trans Ams as the crew had begged. Consequently, the entire production was placed in the hands of exactly 4 cars. No more, no backups. Those 4 vehicles had to shoulder the entirety of high-speed chases, spins, drifts, collisions, and continuous destruction. This transformed every shooting day into a strategic equation rather than a standard production pipeline. There were no backup vehicles, no alternatives if one shattered. Every decision to deploy a car into an action scene felt like drawing the final capital from a depleting bank account. The crew was forced to calculate camera angles, collision distances, and risk thresholds like engineers trying to prevent a systemic collapse. Instead of focusing on making the action grander, they had to prioritize one vital objective: how to not destroy every single vehicle before the film could cross the finish line. This brutal constraint inadvertently forged a specific pressure, where every take carried direct financial peril. Number 8. The vehicles utterly destroyed on set. With only 4 cars in his hands, Hal Needham had no choice but to push them to the absolute physical boundaries of endurance. No miniature substitutes, no backup duplicates, and certainly no computer-generated imagery to fix it in post. Everything unfolded directly in front of the lens, real metal colliding with real concrete, glass shattering into the air, frames warping under the violent force of high-speed pursuits. Each Trans Am was pushed into a sequence of real-world stunts where the margin of error was practically zero. One car was launched directly beneath a bridge in a shot that could never be redone. Another slammed through a barricade at actual speed. The remaining ones rolled multiple times in chaotic, drawn-out chase sequences. There was no concept of a safe retake every time a car appeared on screen. It was being consumed in the real world. The crew wasn't just filming, they were watching their assets disintegrate day by day. By the time production wrapped, not a single one of the 4 cars was functional. All had become literal wreckage, crushed by the absolute demand for on-screen realism. Pontiac's initial stinginess accidentally pushed the entire project into an extreme state. Either the movie was completed, or every single vehicle was obliterated in the process. And the irony is that this severe lack of resources created a level of authenticity no massive budget could ever buy, where every crash on screen was the visual imprint of a real car being genuinely destroyed. Number 9. A fake final scene that audiences never noticed. The final scene of Smokey and the Bandit was designed to conclude with a perfect burst of speed, but the truth behind it stood in total opposition to the image on screen. The Pontiac Trans Am appearing in this shot was actually completely broken. Its engine was entirely dead. The crew had no budget to replace the car, nor could they extend the shooting schedule. So they were forced to resolve the situation in the most purely technical way possible. Another vehicle was positioned just outside the frame, used to physically push the dead shell of the Trans Am down the asphalt. The camera was angled precisely to conceal the entire pushing force from behind, leaving only the image of a car running with pure attitude. On screen, it was a smooth, powerful conclusion, but in reality, it was merely a hybrid of camera trickery and human labor pushing a lifeless machine. No CGI, no post-production effects, just a simple filming trick so effective that it completely deceived the viewer's perception. And ironically, this very moment deemed fake became one of the most iconic images of the entire film, proof that sometimes cinema doesn't need to be real. It only needs to make the audience believe. Number 10. The film that turned Pontiac into a national craze. Immediately following the release of Smokey and the Bandit, the effect it generated transcended every Hollywood prediction. The film didn't just win the box office, it triggered a real-world consumer phenomenon that the automotive industry had never witnessed. The Pontiac Trans Am, previously just another muscle car in the catalog, suddenly became the national symbol of freedom and speed on the American highway. Crucially, audiences weren't convinced by advertising, they were convinced by the image they had just witnessed inside the theaters. The drifts, the roaring engine, and the Bandit's reckless demeanor transformed the car into a character rather than a vehicle. In 1978 alone, Trans Am sales surged from roughly 68,000 to over 93,000 units, meaning over 25,000 extra cars sold in a single year without any significant traditional marketing campaigns. Pontiac almost accidentally inherited a 2-hour nationwide commercial, spreading through word of mouth rather than television. Buyers didn't just want to own a vehicle, they wanted to recreate the feeling of living outside the rules embodied by the Bandit. And in that moment, an action movie became the largest spontaneous marketing tool of the 1970s, something no advertising campaign could ever pre-program. Number 11. Luxurious promises from Detroit's top executives. When Smokey and the Bandit unexpectedly detonated at the box office, it didn't just generate revenue, it created a shockwave through the entire ecosystem of the American automotive industry. The Pontiac Trans Am instantly became a pop culture icon, and at the center of that phenomenon was none other than Burt Reynolds. In the eyes of Detroit, he wasn't just an actor, he was the face that turned their product into a dream of speed. It was amidst this euphoria that promises began appearing like a ritual of gratitude. A Pontiac executive once promised Reynolds a Trans Am as a direct thank you. Higher up, the CEO of General Motors pushed the promise even further, a brand new car every single year, lasting indefinitely as recognition for his contribution. In that brief moment, everything bore the hue of justice. The man who created the value was properly rewarded. But Detroit does not operate on emotion. It operates on structures, profit margins, and shifts in power. When executive leadership rotated, the commitments spoken during the height of euphoria began to be audited as line-item expenses. No public announcements, no media debates, just the gradual erasure of those promises from the internal system. Burt Reynolds remained the man who drove tens of thousands of orders to Pontiac. But the gratitude intended for him was pulled back so quietly it practically ceased to exist. And that story stands as a textbook example in the worlds of Hollywood and Detroit. The memory of gratitude can be rewritten as easily as a financial note. Number 12. Buford T. Justice, dissolving the script. In cinema, the script is usually viewed as an unalterable structure. But for Jackie Gleason, who portrayed Sheriff Buford T. Justice, the script was merely a starting point, not a boundary. From the moment he took the role, he flipped through the first few pages and almost immediately discarded the entire dialogue structure. Gleason didn't care about the words prepared by the screenwriters. He wanted the character to react like a real human being, unburdened by pre-written logic. According to multiple accounts from Burt Reynolds, Gleason barely used a single original line from the screenplay. Instead, he invented the words, the reaction pacing, and the entire comedic nuance right on the spot while the cameras were rolling. The blunt curses, the explosive reactions, the way he screamed, paused, and abruptly shifted his tone, all of it was live improvisation. Initially, Hal Needham genuinely feared this indiscipline would shatter the film's structure. But when reviewing the footage, he realized the opposite. It made the character more alive than any written script could. Gleason didn't just play Buford T. Justice, he transformed him into a living entity existing right on set. What is remarkable is that despite the total destruction of the dialogue, the character became oddly unified, hilarious, unpredictable, and anchored in reality. This controlled chaos accidentally forged one of the most iconic police figures in 70s American cinema, a character not written, but reinvented day by day during the shoot. Number 13. The real-life origin of Buford T. Justice. Buford T. Justice the loud, hot-tempered, and nearly uncontrollable sheriff was not a pure product of Hollywood imagination. This character was constructed from real-life fragments, starting with the very name. Buford T. Justice was taken directly from an active police officer serving in Florida at the time. Notably, this origin was not foreign to Burt Reynolds. His father had been a police chief in Riviera Beach, and through his work, he personally knew the man bearing this name in real life. Those personal connections became the foundational material for how the character was shaped. It wasn't a process of pure imaginary creation, but a piecing together of memory, observation, and real experience regarding the Southern American highway patrols of the era, from the gruff tone and domineering attitude to the instinctual reactions. Everything was lifted almost intact from real life. Even the signature curse, "Sumbitch," was not a screenwriter's product, but the language that already existed in the actual environment of highway patrol officers. The result was a character simultaneously hilarious and tense, exaggerated yet strangely authentic. More importantly, when Buford T. Justice stepped onto the screen, he was no longer a mere fictional character, he became an amplified copy of a real system. blurring the line between cinema and reality entirely. Number 14, a romance caught in the pressure of the set. Requiring no romantic script or carefully staged scenes, Burt Reynolds and Sally Field simply fell into the right time, the right space, and the exact type of pressure that strips away all acting facades. Amidst a set perpetually vibrating with engine roars, dust clouds, and vehicles systematically destroyed to serve high-speed scenes, the two human beings gradually formed a connection difficult to name, not a manufactured romance, but something that naturally sparked in an environment stretched as tight as a wire. There were no rehearsed dialogues, no real-life character development plans. There were only raw reactions emerging between grueling shooting hours and a production pressure bearing down heavier by the day. Hal Needham quickly recognized that what was occurring between his leads wasn't good acting, but a form of interaction impossible to replicate with technical direction. Instead of controlling it, he chose to step back, letting the camera capture the glances, the smiles, and the unscripted moments of silence. That lack of control became the most precious asset the film possessed. However, the more they allowed spontaneous emotion to unfold, the more the crew faced a harsh reality with each passing day. Production was slowing, the budget was eroding, and no one was certain if this story behind the lens would hit its conclusion before the manufacturing system collapsed. Number 15, a song written in a night of extreme duress. In a racing film, music isn't just a background, it is the second engine of the narrative. Jerry Reed, balancing a supporting role and the task of composing the theme song, was placed under a pressure no musical score could easily map out. He promised to deliver on time, but as the final shooting days drew closer, the silence in his hands stretched on. No demos, no experimental melodies, no sign of a completed track. Meanwhile, Hal Needham was running out of patience. The budget had been slashed, the shooting schedule left no room for delay, and the entire crew stood on the precipice of wrapping up without its musical soul. Then, one night, Reed vanished with his guitar. No one knew what he did during those hours. No studio, no support team, just an artist facing the pressure of time in absolute silence. The next morning, he returned and played a simple, raw, but extraordinarily solid melody, Eastbound and Down. Not complex, not flashy, but carrying the exact respiration of the film. The entire soundstage instantly fell silent. Needham didn't react immediately, as if checking to ensure this was real. After a few seconds, he offered a single warning if a single note was altered. He would not accept it. A song born from extreme duress, almost a survival reflex, ultimately became the musical soul of the entire film, the thread locking every pursuit, every crash, and every chaotic moment into a singular, unified rhythm. Number 16, the film misjudged completely by critics. Before Smokey and the Bandit debuted, critics had practically written their conclusions in advance. A film about racing, bootlegged beer, and chasing cops was viewed as a cheap formula, lacking depth, and destined for quick oblivion. Negative reviews were prepared as if this were merely a short-term piece of entertainment, unworthy of serious analysis. But when the film officially hit theaters, all those predictions were shattered within weeks, instead of vanishing quickly as many assumed. The film exploded at the box office to the tune of $126 million, becoming the second highest-grossing film in America in 1977, standing only behind Star Wars. The shock wasn't just the gross, but the viral speed audiences didn't care if the film was artistic enough. They only knew they wanted to watch it again. It didn't need to convince the critics, it went straight to the audience. Those who had sneered were forced to witness a work deemed cheap entertainment become a mainstream pop culture icon. By 1978, the film even clinched an Academy Award nomination for Best Film Editing, delivering a direct counterpunch to an academic evaluation system that historically looked down upon commercial action cinema. But what caused the industry the most awkwardness didn't lie in awards or box office numbers, but in the reaction of someone entirely outside the debate, a figure no one expected this film to touch so deeply. Number 17. Hitchcock's Secret Replays. No one would think Alfred Hitchcock could be linked to a racing comedy as loud, rowdy, and dust-covered as Smokey and the Bandit. But according to Patricia Hitchcock, his daughter, the truth lay in a bizarre detail in his final years. Hitchcock had a habit of hosting private film screenings every Wednesday night for close friends right inside his study. And amidst a mountain of complex cinematic works, the piece he returned to the most was neither art house nor horror. It was Smokey and the Bandit. A film deemed pure entertainment became the favorite choice of the master of cinematic psychology. This left filmmakers bewildered, because if Hitchcock, infamously fastidious and possessing the most refined cinematic eyes, was captivated by it, the definition of a low-value film was clearly flawed from the start. Perhaps what attracted him wasn't the narrative, but the pacing, the controlled chaos, and the pure sense of freedom the film exuded. And that exact truth proves a simple thing sometimes. The works most looked down upon are the ones that live longest in cinematic memory. Smokey and the Bandit proves a simple yet difficult to accept truth: legends do not need to be luxurious to survive. Sometimes, it is precisely the chaos and lack of control that forge something outlasting every calculation of Hollywood. And perhaps, even that old VHS tape sitting in your cabinet is merely concealing a piece of the story this industry has never wanted to fully tell. Do you know any other crazy facts about Smokey and the Bandit? Comment below to share. And don't forget to like and subscribe to watch our next Hollywood Backstage Secrets.